Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast. This is going to be part 2 of the Slain by Subtlety episode. So if you missed last week, go back and watch that one. We're joined again tonight with Thundra Staves Rangel, who is an ex-Jehovah's Witness member. And last week we sort of looked into, explored her story, her journey of leaving the cult, and then, sort of dealing with the psychological damage that was left. And so last week we really kind of looked at, the psychology, the trauma itself. And so this week we're going to be looking more at the solution side of things. We always want to be able to identify problems, but then know how to navigate those problems and where to move forward into a more ideal situation. So,
well, welcome, Thundra. So thank you for joining us again. I'm excited to delve into part 2 here.
Thank you for having me, guys. Good to see you both.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and as you said there, Logan, delving into unconscious trauma, that's really the kind of a foundational theme that seems to be really in context to this whole subject with, cults and indoctrination and mind control in general, because that trauma has to really be put into the level of the unconscious and the subconscious mind to get those programs in there to where they're running in a way that we are unaware of them. And last week we were delving into some of the different ways that, a lot of that trauma got, put into the unconscious mind. So I think it's really important for us to obviously, if that is where you could say the virus exists, you have to go there to actually deal with it. So we're going to be looking at, some of the tools that we can actually use here to work with the unconscious mind. And those are being the, the arts and gnosis and ritual. So Thundra, in your personal journey, what was it that really drew you to some of these arts, and how have they, had an impact and helped you really learn to navigate your way into finding a self-identity and finding your way out of the cult mindset?
Right. Yeah. I would say that the number one thing that really drew me to specifically working with like ritual and learning about the arts of gnosis was a desperation on my part. I had been in denial for many years and just in survival mode. So I really hadn't taken the time for myself to sit down and really take a look at what I had personally been through and what the solutions could be for myself. I know I've always been drawn to this spiritual aspect of things. Of course, that was all, demonized, as we had spoken about earlier. So, I was really afraid of getting into a lot of this stuff and very cautious for a long time. And I think what really allowed me to open myself up to working with things that I didn't quite understand or wasn't able to stand back and predict, what would happen, getting out of my safety zone, was really taking a look at the people I knew who were applying these practices into their life. And, there's that old scripture that says, by their fruits you will recognize them. And I saw people I respected and cared about and trusted that were diving deep and getting tremendous results and a lot of healing. So I really just sort of said, at this point I have to do something or I'm not going to survive.
So that
really
had to
was
be
that
really like overwhelming for you. It's like you knew you had to do something. You knew that what you were doing was no longer working for you. But then you're faced with the, daunting undertaking of figuring out a new direction pretty much on your own. How did you figure out what your first step should be towards, doing something different?
Well, I had been online for many years and doing all kinds of research online and reading different books and talking to different people. And I really felt like, wow, it's one of those nights. Can you ask me that question again? Because it honestly just left my brain.
Yeah, I was just asking, in context to the overwhelming undertaking of taking a different direction. You knew you had to do something. You knew this wasn't working for you anymore. How did you know, like, what was the first thing, the first steps to take in a different direction, basically?
Right. Yeah. Getting out of that feeling stuck energy that I had been existing in for a long time. I don't really know what was the driving force. I would say that ultimately I just went with my gut and trusted my intuition on things. If something felt off, then I kind of sit back and observe, and I watch people I know explore, and I sort of remain an observer, which for me, like the spiritual path, like once you get open to a lot of things, it kind of feels like you're in a hurry. Like you want to wake up and you want to know everything all at once. And being able to step back was something that I had to really learn how to do, because I did jump in full force years ago into all the new age stuff and ended up kind of off in a whole different direction of denial, honestly. So when it came to really embracing what we would consider occult teachings, the things that have been hidden from us, I worked with a couple of people that I really trusted, and I took my time and I just kind of observe and document and go with the flow. I mean, there's really no way of predicting what's going to be the outcome. You just kind of have to be open-minded enough to allow yourself to experience things and, go from there. It's for me, it's been a matter of just trying to flow with the universe. As whatever presents into my life, I can say, yeah, I'm open, I want to explore that, or you know what, maybe I'll just hold off for a minute and see what else the universe has to offer. Because as you know, the search for truth is a lifelong search, so there's really no hurry.
The never-ending story.
There's a few things that you said there that I really wanted to hit on. The first being that this really came out of, you sought these solutions out of having a deep need for them, which I would like to look at. We could see through the rune of Malthes, of really being in a situation where you're stuck. So you have a very desperate need, but it's out of that need that you come up with a new and kind of creative way to go about, looking at that solution. And when you can tap into that new way of looking at it, it helps you, break out of that feedback loop that we were talking about.
Yeah, it's like the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And I mean, though the wording is a bit, we're not talking about inventing something, but in a way you are inventing a new path. Like it's a call to do something different than what's been done before.
And I wanted to elaborate on that a little more with the context of, so a lot of people, before you had talked about in the first part, the compound PTSD. So a lot of people don't even realize that they have a lot of this unconscious trauma here, and that there actually is a need for them to look at it. So they may not even recognize that they're in that. And we have to first kind of recognize that that's there and then be willing to seek the solutions. But you also used an interesting word where you were kind of saying there wasn't necessarily one thing, but at the same time, it was just the fact that you remain open to exploring new things And it's having that mindset of being open and willing to consider things that helps step you out of that cult mindset, because you're actually, instead of, you know, being stuck in this loop of, you know, this is how it is, you have an open mindset where you're willing to explore and ask questions. And I think operating from that foundational mindset is a really huge step in being able to walk yourself out of this kind of unconscious trauma and this feedback loop we've been talking about.
Yeah, I definitely, something that really comes to mind when you're saying that is how many years I spent in my intellect doing all this research. And yet, I mean, obviously, the intellect is incredibly important. I'm a very left-brain person anyway, so that was a comfort zone for me. And what I came to realize when I really started sitting down and having the daily practice was that this opened me up to experiencing my feelings and experiencing things, you know, were coming up for me that I didn't, you know, I thought I had resolved. Obviously, I hadn't. And what I really came to realize is that I spent a lot of that time in research and watching videos and in reading because I was running from myself. So I think there's a balance that we need to keep in mind, that just because you're researching things, you can know everything there is to know about everything. You know, I mean, obviously none of us will ever get there, but you can think you know everything there is to know, and you can spend hours and hundreds of hours on research, but if you're not actually applying it into your life, it's completely useless, and you're just running from your feelings in a lot of instances.
Yeah, what that's bringing up for me is kind of reminding me of generally the New Age mindset, and you know, a word that you hear a whole lot within those realms is healing. You know, they're all about your healing, your journey, you know, yoga and doing all these things, and you know, they want emotional like freedom to be yourself unapologetically and speak your truth and all these kind of things, which those things all do have a lot of value. But the problem that I see with a lot of these you know, people that are pushing this kind of these kind of ideas is that they're very much bypassing the emphasis on truth objectively, and how without that you're never going to actually truly heal. All you're doing is telling yourself a different story that your wounded ego wants to hear, and it may bring some temporary satisfaction to you at that time, but in the long run you're actually setting yourself up for even more pain, because eventually, if you're not grounded in truth, those beliefs that you're, you know, saying your affirmations, I am beautiful, I'm perfect, all these things, if you're not grounding that in truth, then your experiences are going to you know, it's built on a very weak foundation, and then when that crumbles down, all that work that you've done, and you're going to feel devastated, you're going to feel like you're, you know, 2 steps back from where you were when you began, and all that kind of thing. So like, you know, I was just having a discussion yesterday about somebody, you know, really talking about affirmations, you know, and again, I wasn't necessarily speaking against affirmations. I was just saying that without the natural law process of interacting and testing your beliefs in order to confirm, disprove what you're building your whole worldview on, whether it's solid rock or quicksand, you know, and that's very important, because healing has to be grounded in truth, or it's not true. You're just lying to yourself.
For sure. I agree with that 100%. It's go ahead, Logan. My apologies.
Oh, no, you're fine. I just brought that up because you had mentioned the new, you know, you kind of fell into the, and as did I, so I can definitely relate to the part of my journey. I came out of Christianity totally atheist, nihilistic, materialistic, I think similar to you did. And then I sort of back into the new age, you know, with a lot of very valuable things as well, sacred geometry and you know, mindfulness, yoga, breathing, you know, the chakras and things like that, but also fell for some of those pitfalls that are all too often being thrown around there as well. And that's when I found anarchy and natural law and everything, and that seemed to bring like synthesis and holistic balance to everything that I was learning and trying to incorporate all these different aspects together. So
yeah, I found myself in a very similar situation, going to these different retreats and getting completely blissed out with people and doing these mass meditations and things. And then, you know, honestly, a lot of those events left me very drained, and I didn't really understand why that was until kind of when I stepped away. I realized like I was turning my energy over in not much of a different way than I would have been just going to a church or, you know, back to the cult. You have to be very mindful of when you're participating in things, of keeping your boundaries healthy and clear, and not just turning your energy over to whatever guru and, you know, all these different practices that are emerging from the New Age movement. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar. I got really wrapped up in a thing called Deeksha, which was a oneness blessing movement, which is really big amongst most energy healers I know are doing it. And I felt like something was off. So I did a lot of research and then started to realize, like, you know, I'm not gaining energy from this. I'm handing it over, and it was draining me. I ended up, you know, not being able to get a job and getting sicker. And I just thought, you know, again, like that self-blame came in, where I was like, well, maybe it's just me and everybody else seemed happy. Quite frankly, it was another cult, you know. And really, I think the ultimate thing,
it's another form of escapism. And
it
that in
definitely
itself is
was.
exhausting, because you're still running from facing the actual problem.
Exactly. And you know, like we were saying, this is unconscious trauma. So you don't even know it's there until you really take time to sit down. Something I recommend for people is to have a daily practice out of necessity, because it gives you time for you to check in with yourself. And also, you know, maybe even writing out your story. I recently did that and realized there was a lot more I had to deal with than I actually thought, because you start to really uncover all these little things that slip your mind. So I know that's something that they encourage you to do if you are trying to recover from complex PTSD, is to write down your trauma and losses. And it doesn't seem like that's such a big deal. I felt kind of stupid doing mine, and I thought, you know, no, I don't really have any kind of major real trauma until I took a minute to really honor that and say, okay, you know what, I do have a story that doesn't have to be my identity now, but you have to acknowledge it before you can release it. So that's, if it's sitting in the back of your mind forever, it's going to manifest in other ways. And I think that's what we forget, is that our universe and our reality is a projection of what's going on internally. So if you have a messed up life, you've got to reprogram your unconscious mind, period, whether you think you do or not, because the universe is reflecting to you what your issues are. So it's something that I think is really important to remember.
The ways that you're out of alignment with truth and the laws of nature, existence.
Well, yeah, yes, but I think, you know, what as I had mentioned on earlier, part of being able to get out of the cult was what we had talked about in part one, is how they really give up your sense and yourself of your identity and your sovereignty. And how when we can use the arts of Gnosis, how we can actually use those to find and discover our sense of self and start to figure out the system mechanics of how we actually operate internally. So Thundra, you're, you know, a Vedic astrologer as well. You know, how has you know, astrology specifically been helpful for you in not only learning to discover, you know, the system mechanics of your own identity, but also to learn how to use the information that you get from that to design ritual to actually specifically target and work with the different levels of yourself?
Yeah, sorry, Brian, I didn't catch your entire question. I don't know if we have a sound issue here, but just letting you know. Regarding the arts of Gnosis and Vedic astrology specifically has been an incredible door that has been open to me. It's why I'm very passionate about sharing it with other people, because it's just been enlightening on so many different levels. You know, we had talked about a lot of that self-blame and thinking, you know, what's wrong with me? That type of thinking that gets projected onto us. And for me, being able to look at my chart and say, okay, these things were meant to happen. This is not me just being a, you know, a total fuck up or just making horrible decisions or, you know, whatever it was. It was like, you know, validating for me that story that I had lived up until that point. So I was like, okay, you know, I had a belief that I had chosen these things and this was part of my soul's journey. But, you know, really what this was for me was confirmation on so many levels. So this isn't just about finding, you know, your identity in some mystical sounding, you know, thing that doesn't really matter, you know, it's just some foo-foo thing that people do. Like, this is a very concrete science in my experience, and that it has been a huge confirmation on many different levels to see, okay, you know, I'm meant to go through this. And it's not really a tool that I use personally, like to try and predict things. You know, I'm not really into horoscopes or anything like that, but really just to figure out, you know, what journey has my soul encountered in the past? What am I encountering in this life? And how can I live that to the fullest? So it's really been opening, as well as numerology has also been very enlightening. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mayan astrology, but that's something I'm newly diving into in the last like 6 months. And it's just as incredible. You just get all kinds of different confirmations, things that you know deep down that maybe you don't even want to admit to yourself too. So it's not all about just the negative aspects of your journey. It helps you see the beauty in who you are on that soul level, which I think all of us are really, you know, desire that deep down.
Yeah, that's one of the big feedbacks I get with clients and people I work with in my own experience as well, is that firstly, it's a huge confirmation for a lot of things. It allows them to actually quantify and look at the variables that they're operating with energetically and how those are interacting together. And then the other really useful thing, again, that we can do from that is, you know, when you can see how you are working on all your different levels and you understand the different aspects of yourself, if there's an area that you want to strengthen in your life, you know how to then specifically, you know, look at what energetic needs are there, and then to be able to target that with a ritual so you can take it to a level beyond just consciously thinking about it. Like, that's an important part, an important step, but that's just one level. We also have to work with the subconscious and the unconscious mind, and this is where the power of ritual comes in. So would you like to talk about, you know, some of that value, you know, tying in the value of ritual and the arts of Gnosis and how these can be used together?
Absolutely. I think that it's, again, it's something that when you sit down to do ritual, it's an investment in yourself. And that's a really huge thing for a lot of us, especially if you've had issues with boundaries and figuring out what path you want to be on and different things like that. So just taking that time every day is a form of self-care. And then it also, like, for me, it was very empowering to be able to take the reins into my own hands. And, you don't necessarily know what's going to come up if you're working through like karmic issues, but you can pretty much guarantee that once you start the ritual, I mean, it's going to come out one way or another. And that's definitely been my experience many times over. Sometimes I still find myself, when I'm in the thick of it saying, oh, why me and why did I do this to myself? But, I'd rather say, why did I do this to myself than why is everyone doing this to me and feeling like I have absolutely no control. So I think something too that's important to remember, that this isn't just about, a lot of people think of ritual or, I don't really like using the word worship. I know a lot of people do, and that's fine. I personally like to use it as working with energies or an exchange of energy, because for me, the idea of worship is getting on your knees. And I've seen this, obviously in Christianity and monotheism, but also it seems to reverberate over into the pagan and heathen or animist movement, where people are, oh, hail Odin, please give me such and such because I can't do this on my own. And that's completely outside the mindset, because really polytheism or animism has been, it's completely opposite ends of the spectrum to say this, but it has been an absolutely humbling experience and the most empowering experience I've ever had, where you are able to shift your mindset to seeing how you are a part of the universe in a very important way, but you're also surrounded by energies at all times, whether it's just in nature or whether you're working with planets or deities, that you're not alone and you can call on these things to assist you. And it's all about respect for yourself and respect for life, which I think is something that's missing out of a standard monotheistic mindset. So that's been a big thing for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that's absolutely resonates with me as well, because I had a similar journey to both of you, where I was raised in a Christian home, and then, I turned to atheism for a while, and then kind of, was on a path of my own discovery without, where I looked at kind of the Eastern philosophies and things. But whenever I found the really animist mindset, and specifically of my ancestral lineage, then that's when things really started to come together and open up for me. And I find that mindset of, being the empowered warrior, and, that we talk about a lot, being a spiritual warrior, living fearlessly, being willing to die in battle, how that's really tied into respect for other people's boundaries, to the point that, even if they're, doing something where they're going to be learning a lesson the hard way, if they're not asking for your help, you respect that that's their journey, to the extent, because that's part of, whatever challenge that they have set up for themselves, to experience. So, and I notice it's also a mindset that is not, it's just not tied down to one thing. It's always constantly evolving, and the way with, one person may work with a certain, deity or archetype, could be totally different than how another person works with that same deity or archetype. So, it's a much more, open and evolving, but also very personally interactive, kind of spiritual practice. It's a lot more, you're looking at what your personal needs are, and then really, you know, trying to delve in and work with those. And I know for me that was really helpful, being able to feel like there's a science behind this, that I can actually use a lot of these tools to then fine tune and actually work on the areas of my life where I was seeking improvement.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think one of the big shifts I've had in that whole seeing myself where I exist in my universe is, you know, the law of Gabo. You know, you're always in a state of giving and receiving. And, you know, I recently found that I've expanded upon that understanding. For instance, I've gotten recently into doing sound healing. So I have a big giant crystal bowl that I sit down with every day, and it's a wonderful relaxing tool I have. And as I've been doing this, like when I'm done, because I feel like I've gotten so much out of it. Yes, it's a bowl, it's a crystal bowl, but I actually bow to it and say thank you, because it's given me something. So I'm going to give something back. And you know, when you start talking about working with the energies or the planetary energies or the different deities, like, you know, if you call on them for a specific reason, you're going to immediately want to give back in the form of some kind of offering. So this is not just about a personal spiritual practice, but that's then going to, you know, translate over into how you interact with other people. And it makes you stop and think, you know, am I always taking, or am I always giving? And to try to, you know, get a more balanced view of that, which again goes back to having healthy boundaries, which is, I think, really stage one for probably most of us.
Dorsage.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It just, all these points that you're making and that we're discussing, they just keep pointing back to sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty. You know, get off your fucking knees. Like, learn who you are, learn who you aren't, live in alignment in that balance of you know, positive and apophatic. You know, the law of correspondence, you know, through the astrology is looking at the cosmos and the moving parts out there, but it's also telling you about how that corresponds to your inner world, how you should be going about your path in life, and what you're here to learn. I mean, it's powerful stuff. So yeah, this is all really, really amazing. You know, this is very real, tangible things that people can do to take their power back. And I mean, we're talking about healing here. Like, we hear so much about healing, but I don't know. I kind of feel like there's a shortage of real solutions. Everybody's just talking about healing, but nobody's talking about how to do it, or what they're doing, or what that looks like exactly. You know, and there are many, many forms of healing. There's a lot of different modalities that you can go into, and really, I think, you know, it's about being in touch with yourself, looking to see what's out there and seeing what your soul feels called to, because, you know, trusting that kind of divine intelligence, that deeper intelligence in your gut that will guide you. But I think, you know, this is definitely one that's very, very universally useful and applicable.
Absolutely, it is the science of all sciences. You know, and another thing we had talked about before, you know, that, you know, I think ties in here is, you know, in coming into the more empowered mindset, looking at an animus mindset, you find that it also helps you kind of tap into a lot more of an allegorical mindset, or, you know, the ability to really, you know, tap into symbolic, you know, thinking mindset. And that was something that you had kind of brought up before, Logan. Do you want to delve into that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think that as soon as, and then, you know, we're talking about looking at life allegorically, metaphorically, symbolically. In order to do that, you have to be using both parts of your brain. But I'd say more specifically your right brain, which tends to get largely shut down, especially in the West, and all the you know, the different systems that are in place. But as soon as you do that, I mean, that was one of the most explosive, like transformative shifts in my own consciousness that happened to me when I started discovering and studying symbolism and, you know, dissecting words, looking at metaphors, and, you know, and then all of a sudden I couldn't sit through a movie without sitting there and picking it apart and saying, oh, this is totally like subconsciously telling you this or that. But life is the same thing. Life is a movie that's constantly playing out, and there's always a moral of the story. Whatever story that you're involved in or is playing out in your reality at any given time is like a children's fable. There's a moral of the story built into it. That's what this place is. And as soon as you know, open your eyes to be actually open to receive and observe and really like glean those symbolic messages that are constantly being you know, shown to us through the universe. I mean, I can't even begin to, you know, to do it justice through words how amazingly powerful that is to your own shifting your own awareness and starting to realize kind of the real meaning of life and the human experience, basically. And you know, you can tie this back to, you know, you mentioned animism and paganism, because, you know, everybody knows about, you know, mythology, the myths, the stories, the sagas, whatever have you. You know, anyone with any sense or have looked into this knows these are not literal stories. These ancient people didn't believe there was literal gods in the sky throwing thunderbolts and stuff. These are archetypal symbols of aspects of human consciousness and different parts of the human experience, the spiritual experience. And again, so when you study those, you can kind of almost start learning how to connect things like that back to your own seemingly normal mundane life, you know, even if you have still an office job or whatever it is. It's all still there, you know. It's just about shifting your awareness, your perspective, and being able to actually see that. And it's like it was always there right in front of your face, and then all of a sudden it just like pops out at you, and it's this huge epiphany. You know, that was my experience.
Yeah, what that brings up for me is, you know, as we talked about here, is the power of mythos and allegory to be able to get past the barriers of like the ego, you know, and actually part of the subconscious and the unconscious mind. And tying this back with, you know, what we're dealing with here is unconscious trauma. And I think, you know, that's why our ancestors, they looked at the power, you know, they understood the power of story and mythology was so useful for that very reason, is it kind of allows us to slip past our own, you know, individual ego and then allow it to get into the subconscious and unconscious mind, where we can look at it through a different, you know, we can kind of step back and look at it, you know, because we're seeing that lesson through the story, but then we can take that lesson that we find within that and apply it to our own life without, you know, necessarily feeling like attacked or triggered by it. So I think that's what that brought up for me there. What are your thoughts on that, Thundra?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how much time people in general spend escaping their reality by being consumed with these stories on TV or movies. And, you know, generally when we think of like the hero's journey, you know, it's they never had it easy. They had everything up, you know, against them, and they had to overcome, you know, the dark night of the soul and all the struggles in their life. And so why not embrace that as your own journey? You know, if we have the power to do that, why would we just want to sit back and not make a dent in this universe or in this world that we're here to? I mean, I want to make a big dent in the world. So I want to be the hero in my own story. And I want to see the people I love and care about who are seeking to also embrace that. It's very empowering. It helps you make sense of things that maybe don't feel so good. It's just all around, to me, you know, why not jump in and be a part of it rather than just sit on the sidelines and watch everyone else. You know, we can waste our time while we're here, or we can completely embrace it. And you know, I don't know about you guys. I think we're all in agreement that we want to be the heroes in our own story, and we want to make a big impact on this world. The world needs us.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to add too, because this is so on point, I think, what you guys are saying, but then also consider, why is it, do you think that the you know, the social engineers or whoever, you know, you want to refer to them as, put so much emphasis and energy into weaponizing films, movies, music? These are ways to manipulate the subconscious mind. They know this. They understand exactly how the mind works, and they're using it to manipulate people on a massive scale. So when we're talking about stepping into ritual, doing mantras, things like that, that's using the same exact magic essentially, but you're programming your own subconscious mind rather than letting them do it for you through, you know, their various medias and things like that.
Absolutely. And what this brings up here, for me here, is that, you know, one thing I'd like to remind anyone listening to this is that especially if you had been raised in, you know, one of these cults, maybe a monotheist, you know, a Christian home or something like that, if you're feeling a resistance to some of the things we're talking about, like astrology, or you're maybe laughing it off, thinking it's something woo-woo, or, oh, there's nothing like that, let me, you know, say that, you know, these are sciences that you can actually go and test, and none of us here are asking you to believe us. We're telling you to go out and actually test these different things. But what it brings up for me is that, you know, a lot of times we're very resistant to the things that's actually going to help us. I don't really think people are afraid of their failure so much as they are of their success.
Empower.
They've got to go through that challenge, you know, that hero's journey and that challenge to get to that. So we will feel a lot of resistance to maybe, you know, an animist or a pagan mindset, or resistance to ritual, or, you know, astrology or runes or tarot, or whatever that may be, that could actually be a very useful tool for us to help us come in it and address things from a more empowered state of mind.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Well, and it kind of also brings up for me is that, you know, when I kind of hear people coming at it from that mindset, like maybe, you know, they're kind of like laughing it off or thinking it's some woo-woo thing, just like I did when I wasn't, you know, actually researching it. I can guarantee, you know, right off the bat that those people haven't actually delved into it, because it really is such a vast and complicated science with so many different layers. And, you know, if you actually start to look at it, you realize how, you know, truly complicated it can be. You know, and I think that, you know, again, that brings it to the point of how useful it is for a self-gnosis, because you're coming from a place of actually having knowledge, then, not only of how this specific art of gnosis works, but knowledge of yourself. Whereas if you're coming from the mindset of mockery, you're coming from a place of where you don't actually have, you know, the intellectual knowledge, but you're also cutting yourself off from really being able to know yourself at the truest level.
Exactly. Like, why do we call it the arts of gnosis?
Right.
You know, because it allows you to know who you are on the deep. This is what I try to tell people, you know, who are afraid of the word occult, because they don't understand what it means. But these arts and sciences will open you up to the absolute deepest forms of psychology that is available, that we know about at this point. This isn't just about looking at a planet and where it's sitting and thinking, oh, you know, how is that energy affecting us here? This is really, you know, figuring out how your system functions and how you function and respond to stimuli around you. So when you know that, you can you can act and think and behave differently, and you can respond differently to circumstances once you know like how you function. You know, some of us are very quick, you know, like for instance, I have Mars in my 8th house. So I'm very, very quick to temper and to respond very quickly. One of the things I like to, I personally laugh at was we have like a wood pellet stove. You know, we're up here in Wisconsin, and we have like this, to me, it's a foreign object because I'm a Floridian, and I'm like, okay, how do we use this thing, and trying to figure it out. And one day smoke starts billowing out of it into our living room. I mean, like massive amounts of it. And I immediately like start opening all the doors and the windows. And my husband, who's a Libra and much more balanced than I am, he just, you know, he's standing there looking at me like, why are you freaking out? And I'm like, why aren't you? Why are you not taking action? Like, I mean, like a half a second and all the windows and doors are flung open. And he's like, what is going on? So, you know, I'm a very quick responder, which means I also tend to have, you know, more of a temper. So I, you know, I have to look at these things about myself. And then it also makes you less judgmental about, you know, comparing yourself with other people, whether you're judging other people or yourself. You're like, you know what, this is how I'm meant to function. And if you want to work on it and change it, you can, because you can identify those strengths and weaknesses and work on them. But it's, you know, it's been such an enlightening experience. I can't imagine my life without these arts and sciences at this point. It's completely changed how I view myself and the world.
Absolutely. It really helps me, like I said, try to approach things from being, you know, a midwife of consciousness, which is something Logan and I have talked about, of not only being able to understand where you are with things, but also where other people are, and then to, you know, like you, I think you said it really well there, to not be so judgmental, you know, not only of others, but of yourself. You can look at something that, and like what I like to say, you know, with all my clients, is that our strengths can be our weaknesses and our weaknesses can be our strengths. Become aware of that energy, you then have the choice to do what you want with it, and you can work with that. So, you know, you mentioned, you know, having some 8th house energy. That's, I totally understand that, because I have, you know, 3 planets sitting in there, you know, in the 8th house as well. So that quick energy could mean that, yeah, there's some struggles and some very sudden changes, but that could also be a very good quality, you know, in a situation, because, you know, having gone through some of those sudden experiences in your life, you then gain that, you know, that experience and that, you know, knowledge from that whenever those things come up later on, you then have that experience you can look to know how to deal with it and be able to transmute that situation a lot quicker than maybe people who don't have access to that disposition. And I think that's so useful for us all to be able to look at where our strengths and our weaknesses are, so we can then choose to, you know, see ourselves in a more holistic manner. The next thing I wanted to kind of ask you about, Thundra, was working with the trickster energy, like Loki or Rahu, and how is maybe tapping into some of that trickster energy and experiencing it, maybe, you know, through having to go through this experience in the cult, you know, how has that been an influence on your life, and, you know, how can it lead to, you know, also leading to a solution at the same time?
Yeah, that's been a big part of my journey, is working with the trickster energy. Before I even knew what that meant, you know, I think I told you guys before, as a child, I was, I've always been pretty aggressive, I guess, but I would watch Tom and Jerry, or the Coyote and the Roadrunner, and I can remember like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, and thinking, why won't he just answer her question and tell her where to go, you know, and why do they have to keep messing things up and just catch that mouse and kill it? I mean, I was obviously very out of alignment with myself from a very young age, because I have very, very vivid memories of that, which I find very interesting, because It was one of the first things when I did get my Vedic reading that came out was, you know, do you find that you're easily, like, you know, that you attract a lot of, you know, maybe people who aren't so honest into your life, and that the trickster played a big part in my path. And I thought, oh God, you got to be kidding me. But as I've learned to embrace that part of myself and actually start to put that into practice into my life, that was my first question, is how can you be a moral person and be a trickster? Like, isn't that something that doesn't go together? Because I looked at the trickster as just a liar and a prankster for no good reason. And I've come to realize, you know, my whole journey has been based on having to go through a lesson to discover who I am on a deeper level. And that maybe my approach that I've taken in the past, as far as telling the 100% blunt truth, whether people wanted to hear it or not, that maybe I needed to step back and say, you know, maybe I should ask that person a question. Maybe I should respond in a different manner, because it doesn't always get through to people. Again, that's my Mars in the 8th house. I just want to bang that, you know, into your head until you understand and agree with me. But I've had to step back and say, you know, well, how can I deal and communicate with this person or this situation in a different way so that they may be a little more responsive, or don't see me as, like, you know, a dictator of some sort. But you know, the trickster energy is why I always tell people when they do get a reading from me that if they have a big, you know, if they have a lot of Rahu or Loki energy in their chart, I usually say go and research the Native American, the Heyoka, which is the trickster in Native American culture, or go somewhere to, you know, the Eastern world, because here in the West, the trickster is just like the devil, and that's just not the case at all. You know, the trickster is going to be that person who's going to give you the medicine whether you want it or not, and it's for your own good. It's not out of selfish interest, which is what I think is missing from Western culture. When you do look at, you know, the Joker, for instance, it's like, you know, he's just some psycho who just goes off and wreaks havoc. When, you know, this is not the case in other cultures at all. The trickster is your absolute best friend and the biggest spiritual guide you can have. You're lucky to work with the trickster. So, yeah, that's been my experience with that. So it's been very opening.
Very similar experience to that. Rahu's also my Atma Karka as well. So, you know, Loki and that trickster energy a lot. And, you know, I find it very interesting to reflect on that in the mythology. A lot of people see Loki as kind of, you know, he's the one that, you know, he's always out there, you know, kind of getting into some situations. But, you know, I also find the trickster that, you know, like, as you said, they're really the most honest friends you could have. And, you know, again, in the mythology, it's because of Loki, that trickster, that, you know, the gods have all of their weapons. You know, he may get himself into some situation, but through that, he ends up kind of like, you know, learning lessons or helping other people learn lessons, and then kind of transmuting it and turning it into something that's actually kind of beneficial. You know, Odin has his horse Sleipnir because of Loki. You know, there's a lot of different myths we could look at here. So I think people learning to tap into that trickster energy to not only experience illusion and things like that, but so they can actually have that apophatic experience, because that's, even though it may be difficult to go through, or some people may not see it as pleasant, it's really that experience that's going to give you that lesson that you'll go with a lot. And that very similar to kind of in how Saturn works. You know, a lot of people will look at, you know, Saturn as kind of a malefic, much like they will Rahu. But, you know, it's really a planet that is just very honest. And yeah, it might have a lot of pressure, that it puts on you, but that it's there for a reason, and it's really because it is there for your benefit. So I think those are some good things to look at and reflect on when we're experiencing some of these situations that we may feel are difficult or a struggle. And we're like, why are we going through this? Being able to step back and see, well, what's really behind this, and how can I learn to be more clever in my approach to how I solve this.
Exactly. And I know you guys have probably noticed the trend of people saying, well, Saturn is bad, and, the David Icke material, the Saturn moon matrix and all of that, which I think is really a lot of misunderstanding. But even if I am wrong about that, these are aspects of ourself, and these are aspects of our universe. And if you're just avoiding, the moon or Saturn because you think they're bad and they're evil, like you're running from yourself. You're just completely running away from who you are. And
like what Brian said, resisting often the very thing that's trying to help you and trying to push you, give you that little kind of nudge, or put that pressure on you, like Saturn, it kind of crushes you. Yeah, putting that thumb down on you. And it's like, it's kind of up to you. It's ironic that it's a projection. To say that Saturn is bad is actually a projection, because Saturn is only bad if you're being difficult and if you're being a knucklehead. If you would just stop resisting.
Funny, just cosmic law, that just works good.
Which is the only legitimate authority in the universe. The one authority that we should be submitting to. Yes, stop resisting it. Anything else is madness. It's good. So silly.
You can't get away with it. If you can't get away from it, you might as well embrace it. So.
Right. It's 100% invariably going to cause yourself more grief the longer you fight it. Mm-hmm. So just get with the program, dude.
Yeah, because again, we can look at Saturn. Not only is it a very large planet, but it's a slow-moving planet. So when it puts that pressure, we may experience a lot of the pressure of Saturn. But once we actually start to learn the lesson, then that pressure comes off, and then it becomes a lesson that we retain for a long time. So even though it may be a little bit, it's kind of like you could look at it like a double-edged sword in the sense that, like, yes, there may be some challenge and pressure with it, but that's going to give you create that now-thies that will make you learn to, maybe tap into some of the trickster energy, be creative. So you then learn that higher lesson, and then you
use your imagination to navigate into a better way, a better existence. And this kind of ties back to our magic pill concept, where it's like, do you want to run away from doing the work and just keep trying to satiate that with temporary quick fixes that's only going to just make the problems worse? Or you just take the pain now, and then once you get into it, you start. I swear, like, you'll be like, "Oh, this actually isn't so bad. This is actually pretty great," And then you
it's a
lean
beautiful experience,
and it's liberating.
Yes, exactly. It's so, it can be so difficult, and I don't know what other people's experiences. I can only speak for my own, because Saturn is my Dharma Devata. So when I worked with Saturn, that's where I unlocked what I had been running from within my own unconscious mind. It all came to the surface, and it felt like a nuclear bomb dropped into my life, and I was miserable. But then, I started to see the beauty and the struggle, and it's been really hard. But,
I kind of see that almost.
Do I want to suppress that forever till my next lifetime, or my next, even my next, relationship or whatever it is? Do you want to keep suppressing that? Because it's like that spring, you keep the pressure on it, and then you just let it go and it goes wild. I can't believe I'm using this spring story, because that's something they used to tell us as Jehovah's Witnesses, don't control your children too much because they'll be like a spring, which was completely ridiculous. They would even say that because of the control we were under. But that's kind of how Saturn is. And do you want someone who's going to blow smoke up your butt and just tell you everything's fine and everything's good, or do you want something real? If you want something real, Saturn is your teacher.
Well, that's that gaslighting. They're telling you one thing, which is actually true, but then they're actually doing the exact opposite thing to you while they're telling you that thing. But yeah, I was going to say I see this as kind of related to sort of the if you want to use the word effeminization of our culture, and I don't mean that in a negative way towards women or anything like that, but just in that it's a push towards imbalancing the polarities between each individual, and putting such an emphasis on comfort, convenience, the easy path, the instant gratification, and sort of demonizing the masculine that is toughen up, struggle, push for it, work for it, fight for it. And that's where that's a very necessary component to the evolutionary process of those cycles of it's kind of like that parasympathetic, fight and flight, and then rest and relax, or whatever it is, like that dichotomy between like tension and release. You need both. You got to go out and work hard, and then you rest and you nurture yourself and care and relax, and then you go back out there and you get it again. So
yeah, for me in my chart, I know, as you said, Thundra, you had an interesting experience with Saturn. That's likewise for me. Saturn happens to be my Ishtadevata, and in both my Vedic and my Western chart, Saturn, I have very strong Saturn placement where it falls in my 10th house in both charts. So I feel that pressure a lot, especially when it comes to, wanting to work and things like that. But it's through that of having to kind of experience a lot of those hard pressures that, again, I really have learned a lot of the valuable lessons that I've been able to retain and then, continue to take forward. And it really learning through the experience of cosmic law, because, again, that's what, Saturn is associated with, is cosmic law. And that includes the apophatic process of, having to experience, the cause and effect of, what happens whenever you take a certain action, and seeing that, there's an effect, and, that may not have been the best way to go about that. So that's definitely something in my experience I can relate to as well. But I think another interesting thing that we can move on to and look at here is learning where our energy goes and how we use it. Because that was one thing, in part one, we had talked about how the cult really controls your energy and, where you spend it. But I think another way we can look at this is, there was a question Logan had kind of wanted to pose here about, looking at, our energy in context to social media. Logan, would you like to kind of get into that a little bit there?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a simple point, but I think it applies as far as kind of stepping back and being the observer about, because how often do we really stop and think about what we're posting, what we're putting our attention on, but also calling other people to put their attention on. When you post something on social media, not only are you saying like, this is worth my energy and attention and time, you're telling other people this is, also worth theirs as well. And so it's like, I would encourage anyone to just go on your Facebook page or whatever your, preferred platform is, and just look at what you're posting. Just kind of scroll down and look at the song that you're singing as a whole, like look at the big picture. Is most of your posts, you know, griping about something or blasting, you know, a certain kind of people, or like, you know, dick pic, whatever, like, it's like there's nothing wrong with doing those things inherently, but if you look at your feed and you're looking at each little thing, are you putting value out into the world? Or are you just like, you know, trying to find things to bitch about and complain and bring more negativity in, you know? And you know, like, you're powerful whether you're conscious of your power or not. I always think about, you know, what it's like if a child was swinging a loaded gun around. You know, that gun is powerful either way. The child's consciousness is not matching that, the respect required to wield that power properly. But the power is there regardless. So it's so very important to really look at what you're doing, what you're putting out into the world, because we all have a lot more impact on the world we live in than, you know, than many may think. So that's pretty much it on that point.
Yeah. I think the beauty of social media is that we do have that platform to sing whatever song we want to, and yet how many of us have fallen into the trap of just being an agent for the Matrix, where we're just reposting trash or negativity, or, you know, not that I hate saying, you know, we shouldn't look at, we have to look at the negativity in order to deal with it appropriately. You know, your posts don't have to be all love and light, but if you have an opportunity in this day and age to, you know, we can go live. You know, what other time in history could we just get on our phone and speak to the world? Like, it's really an incredible opportunity, and so many of us just waste our time, or, you know, we're just spreading, you know, pointless negative energy. And, you know, it's a tool that we can use for creation and creating our culture, but instead a lot of us seem to be just pushing the agenda of the people who are creating our culture at this point. So, like, you know, become a creator of you want to see the world change, like, start showing that, change your own world and set the example.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think those are definitely excellent points to look at. And I think another interesting thing that we can delve into here that you had mentioned on before, Thundra, is that, you know, being in the cult, you know, you're struggling for your identity. And as, you know, we look at some of the things that can come out of this, you know, and this is something I think a lot of people in general might relate to, is this struggle that we see kind of between the labels of introvert and extrovert. And I know for me personally, whenever I got into astrology, this was really useful for me to be able to help figure out these dynamics, because we can look and see that, you know, each planet has both an internal expression and an external expression, and nobody is just one or the other. There's like, you know, you might be an extrovert in one area of your life, but you might be a total introvert, you know, in another area of your life. So getting out of this, like, being able to, you know, looking at it as just this very simple black and white thing, and be able to look at the complexity of kind of those mechanics of how you're operating with those specific dynamics was really useful for me. Would you like to kind of get into how that was a useful step in for you getting out of into a healed mindset of coming out of the cult?
Yeah, I definitely, you know, as you were saying that, I was thinking that how much our intellect likes to pick everything apart and put a label on everything. So I was thinking of, you know, how we have the Myers-Briggs test, and we have Vedic astrology, we have numerology, we have all of these tools at our disposal, which, yeah, it puts a label on something, which can really help you digest that. But ultimately, we are a walking paradox, and we have this war going on within ourselves that, you know, we need to address and bring healing to ourselves so that we're in a more balanced state. I know, like, I never did the, like, Myers-Briggs when I was really young, but I always get the INFP. And I've often wondered, because when I was much younger, I was more extroverted, and, you know, my parents used to always say, oh, you always have to have someone in your face. You know, always had to be on the phone or hanging out with somebody. And as I've gotten older, I've become more introverted. And it dawned on me at one point, like, how much of my introversion is a true introversion and how much of it is due to trauma, where I'm not accepting myself. I'm, you know, wallowing in my pain and just being on my own because I didn't want to, you know, infect other people with my negativity. So that is definitely the tools that we have out there to understand ourselves can help us to realize, you know, we're always going to have, you know, that we may lean one way or another way depending on our personality. But is that the personality that's been formed because of what you've been through, or is this like your soul's identity? So, like, I think getting to the root of, like, what is your soul? Who are you? Not what is your story, not what do you do for a living? Like, who are you on that soul level is what we really need to be, you know, clearing the path for ourselves, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is really bringing up something for me.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Logan.
I think Logan is frozen.
Yep, he might be frozen for a second. We'll give it just a few seconds, and he might come back on here. So, there we go, and he's back. Okay, go ahead with what you're saying.
Yeah, this is really bringing up something for me here, is how everything can have like a positive and a negative expression of itself. And so you could look at this from a couple of different ways. First, you could say, you know, is the trauma in, you know, causing you to use people as a crutch, like the social validation, and you can focus on other people so that as it acts as a distraction from dealing with yourself? Or is it going in the opposite direction, where, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially those who self-identify as more of the empath side of things, is that, you know, people really trigger them and they feel ridiculous amounts of anxiety around people in social interactions, because probably, I would guess, that they're in such a state of drowning in their own projections of what other people may be thinking about them or whatever. So it's like the exact opposite, you know, of polarity of the same dynamic there, when it's all grounded in trauma. Then you could kind of look at it from the other angle, where you know, it's like you look at the journey of the awakening process. So I remember, you know, I was also, you know, pretty social as a younger person, when I was just kind of more innocent, and, you know, well, especially when I was like a toddler and stuff. I loved being around people, you know, and it's funny because, again, referring to astrology, in my Vedic chart, my ascendant sign is Leo, so I have that tendency to like being the center of attention, to really get to shine and show off my you know, accolades and things. But then, of course, in the Western, my sun sign is crab, so I also have that tendency to withdraw, and I definitely feel both of those energies at play. You know, if something triggers me the fuck out, like, I need to get away, I need to remove myself from that situation and recenter my own energy without any other interference from other people, because my boundaries are breached too badly at that point to recover. But, you know, back to that looking at the arc of my life, through being young and untainted, and then going through a phase where I wasn't jiving with society, and I felt extremely outcasted, and I was bullied in school. I didn't, people thought I was weird, and I didn't really understand them either, and that was very isolating. And I got, felt very lonely. I had the same kind of social anxiety really bad, being around people. But of course, I loved being around my close friends who I felt very comfortable with, and I could be myself around and things like that. And then, and of course, the more you become aware of the truth about the world and the way things really work, the less you can kind of relate, so to speak, to normal, unquestioning types, right? They're less relatable to you. You're probably less relatable to them. But I think that also along that way, and if you are doing that internal healing and that shadow work, that starts to bother you less too. And you're so free in your own energy and just expressing yourself and like self-amusement and things like that, that layer doesn't even seem to matter as much. So that's kind of where I've gotten to, was going through, coming out of that social anxiety, where I don't have social anxiety almost ever anymore. I mean, of course, certain situations happen that are awkward, but for the most part, I don't have those same projections and stories that I'm telling myself, that my ego is whispering in my head about, oh, they're probably thinking this, or you shouldn't do that, or that looked weird, or whatever it is. And I feel like I've come full circle, and I'm very much a social person again.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think, a lot of what we can tie this into here is when we're looking at our healing, being able to look at our healing from a very holistic approach, and making sure that, we're addressing things on all different levels. And I think another really valuable tool for this is being able to find a teacher or, someone, a member of your tribe that you trust and you can reflect to, and someone that's there that can reflect back to you when you are acting from unconscious behavior. And that's really important. And I think, even, in my experience, being able to go and having someone that, I actually, pay to go and study under is really useful, because, I know that person then can actually honestly step back and reflect back to me, for my to benefit me in the most way, in the most helpful way possible. Would either you guys like to kind of tap into your experience with that?
I can touch on that real quick. When you were saying that, it was reminding me of some stuff that came up for me in the last couple of years through my healing process. And there were times, I tend to be like kind of up or down. So when I'm feeling stable, like really like nothing major's going on, or I'm not emotional, or I'm not, hermiting myself away, I sort of get like this weird feeling like, uh-oh. And I sometimes will think, okay, let me enjoy this for a minute, because I'm feeling stable. And there were times when I felt like everything's going great and I'm feeling really good and nothing major is going on for me to deal with. And that was actually, it turned out because I was working with a teacher who was incredibly helpful in helping me identify when I was in my unconscious resistance. And it turned out that those times for me were actually the times that I was in the biggest resistance to my own healing. It was in a state of denial without even recognizing it. And I just thought, oh, I'm feeling good and everything's great and there's nothing major for me to deal with. But it turned out I was slipping back into that state of denial, or where I didn't even recognize it. So I think that is very important, to have that mentor or teacher there who can, like you said, reflect to you what they see, And it's not like a matter of them, having an opinion where yours doesn't matter and they know everything and you don't. It's a beautiful flow, having a teacher like that you can trust, who will tell you the truth. It's like Saturn. They'll tell you the truth, and they're not going to let you just get away with whatever bullshit, if that's the kind of relationship you have with your teacher. But they're also going to be loving and point out to you, like, maybe you need to take a look at this again because it seems like you're slipping into denial or whatever. And if I could just quickly, I just wanted to make one point about this, healing process and healing from trauma. Something I want people to really understand when you're dealing with trauma is this isn't just nothing. This isn't a flaw of your character if you can't deal with what's been handed to you. These traumatic events that present in a person's life actually alter the neural pathways in the brain. It causes brain damage. And you can create new neural pathways, but you can't do that until you start identifying and figuring out like who you are and why you act a certain way and why you make certain choices. So I don't want people to think that this is just some fluffy sounding word where we're saying, oh, trauma and healing and all of these catchphrases that we hear. This is a very, very real thing biologically and emotionally. So I want people to just kind of keep that in mind when they're exploring, what they personally need for their own healing journey.
Yeah, that's an excellent point for sure.
Absolutely.
And I think that maybe one last thing that we can look at here is not only having mentor and teacher and somebody that you can work on a personal basis, but then of course taking it back to the concept that we talk a lot about here is remembering the tribe. And that's, having more of a circle or a sense of community that you can, connect with and be raw, be real, and have them lift you up and support you, because that's what, that's part of being human too. We are individuals, but we're not just individuals. We are collective, just like the cells in your body are individual, but they are part of a bigger system. And that is so important to embrace all those different layers of reality too, and that's part of living in alignment with nature. We can observe that. So Thundra, would you like to, and it's before I hand it over, it's ironic because looking at the context of where you're coming from and what do they talk about, fellowship versus disfellowship, right? You go to church and it's like that sort of a artificial version of that community. But instead of connecting in truth, you're trauma bonding and connecting and on the lie that you're all living, essentially. So can you maybe look at that dynamic versus maybe what you move forward to in after leaving?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, do you want to be part of a community that is based in a shallow experience, or do you want to really find your true soul family? And if you really want to connect with your true soul family, this is how you can do it. One of the most damaging things you can do is cut people off from their social construct, but it can also be a huge opportunity to find out where you really do belong. Because I know that even if I believe those things I was taught, I don't fit in with that community. It's just, it's not who I am on a very deep level. People who want to, they want to experience life there, that's fine. I'm not going to judge them. I'm not even going to necessarily try to change their mind. But, I want something better for myself. And so if you really want to connect with people, who really want to change the world and empower you instead of bringing you down or trying to throw guilt trips on you. And, why do we need that shit? Why do we put up with that in our life? We are so incredibly brilliant and powerful and beautiful miracles of creation, and yet we sell ourselves so short. So, connecting with your tribe and your soul family is number one, really.
Right. And let's also not forget that even when you feel totally alone, you always have the ancestors too. They always have your back. And that is your family, literally.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah, Brian?
what brings up for me here is that, a good way to kind of sum up what both you were hitting on there is the importance and value of being able to connect with people based on our strengths instead of connecting with people based on our weaknesses.
Excellent.
I think it's a
Connecting
good
with
way to look
sovereign beings.
at it.
Yes.
Absolutely. But
who respect your boundaries and you respect theirs.
absolutely.
Hallelujah.
But I think that's kind of a good way to kind of close this episode out. So, Thundra, would you kind of like to maybe talk about a little bit of some of the services you provide, where people can find you out or find you at, and then maybe some projects you might be like currently working on?
Yeah. So my website, if you want to get in touch with me, is Thundra SR, which is THUNDRA.com. I also have a YouTube channel, Thundra Staves Rangel, and I'm sure all these will be linked. If you're looking for a Vedic astrology reading, if you're interested in learning more about numerology, your connection to spirit animals, healing your ancestral lineage, and if you want more resources, and if you do feel like you've done some research and you may feel that you have a form of like complex PTSD, I do have resources I can help people link to the right people to actually get services for that at a incredibly discounted rate. So I do a little bit of everything. I'm getting into sound healing and actually using the energy from ayahuasca without actually taking it, actually translating it into sound healing for people for root chakra issues. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of everything. If anybody's interested, I'm very open to speaking to new people.
That sounds absolutely incredible. I'm interested to learn more about that myself. But friends and family and wizards alike, this is going to bring this episode to a close. So thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this content. Take action today. Work on yourself. Heal those wounds and connect with who you truly are so that you can live the fullest version of your existence today. So until next week with a new episode, take care and be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.